First of all, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for attending our webinar, Unraveling a Renter's Credit Report. I have here with me Ian Long, who is part of our operations team. And today we're going to talk about one of the most difficult and sometimes confusing parts of the lead qualification process, which is credit reports. And so hopefully in this webinar, we will all learn how to make this a lot simpler for you. Ian, he works really closely with credit reports here at RentJuice, and he's really knowledgeable about understanding a renter's credit history. So I'm going to turn everything over to Ian, and we're going to get started.
Hi, everyone. Definitely excited to be here today, talk about credit reports, and just going to go ahead and get started. So let's face it, credit reports are extremely daunting and confusing. There are so many numbers and obscure terms that go on for pages and pages. In a credit report, you see lots of unfamiliar words and jargon, but when it comes down to it, we just want to look at the most important information in a renter's credit history. That's what we're going to go through in this webinar. So, why do we want to pull credit reports on renters applying for your rental property? When we find a tenant that satisfies all of our criteria on an application, the next step is to make sure they are financially responsible. Good credit is an indication that this person is financially responsible, meaning this person is capable of being able to consistently pay you on time. We are looking for a history of punctual payments. This will prevent you from having to deal with late payments or non-payments of rent, which makes you deal with late fees or even worse, eviction. We all know how much of a headache these issues can cause. When you generate a credit report, you will be using one of the major credit institutions: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Today, we're going to use an example from TransUnion. This is one of their credit reports, which we will refer to throughout the webinar. We have outlined 7 steps for you to follow when analyzing a renter's credit report. These steps will lead to your most qualified renter. Using our guidelines, you'll look at only the most important information that's relevant to you. Step 1 is to check the renter's personal information. As you can see here in our example, the personal information is located along the top of the report. Now, some of you may be thinking that this section isn't important to look at because it's redundant. You know who the person is because you've talked to them several times or because you've seen this information on the application. It's an easy section to glaze over. So then, why is this section important? Because you want to avoid situations where you may have someone misrepresenting themselves. Sneaky renters will sometimes try to say they are someone they are not, so that they can hide a tainted financial past. So, what are the most important factors to confirm here? You want to make sure that the applicant's name, social security number, and date of birth align with the application and ID cards. This will help make sure that this applicant is representing themselves. In the next section is the employment information. You want to confirm that your applicant is employed and earning money, because if they're not working, how can you expect them to pay rent? Make sure that the employer information matches what is on the application, and more importantly, check the income. You don't want to have someone that inflates the amount of income they earn only to pass your minimum income criteria. Not only do you want to make sure that the income is what they claimed on your application, but you also want to make sure they can afford your asking rent. The general rule of thumb for income is that a renter must earn roughly 3 times the asking rent per month. That way, they should be able to pay you. Step 3 involves looking at the report summary. This section will give you the boiled down version of the renter's credit history. Most importantly, it shows how much debt a person has. Although this is a summary of a person's credit history, it still has a lot of information. The information you want to look for is the number of late payments this person has and the amount of debt each person is in. In our example, we want to look at how many times this person was past due on their payments and how much money they owed when they were late. This is extremely important because if this person has a track record of late payments, you put yourself at risk of getting late payments as well. In this example, the person hasn't had any late payments, making them a less risky renter. On the top right, we want to look at the accounts balance. This is how much the person is in debt and how much they owe every month. Take a look at their monthly payment and consider their income. If they're spending more than they earn on outstanding debt, how can you expect them to afford their rent? You want to make sure that the person has a reasonable monthly payment so they're not struggling to pay the rent every month. Step 4 is probably the easiest section to look at, as well as the section that most landlords and property managers focus on. It's the FICO score. Similar to when we were in grade school and a number was given on our essays, a FICO score is like the financial grade of a person. In our credit report example, the FICO score lives in the scorecard section. What you want to focus on is the score itself. The highest score you can possibly get is an 850, while the lowest is a 350. Beneath the FICO score will be a list of reasons why the person received deductions in their score. While it is interesting to read these reasons, it's not crucial to analyze. Remember, we're looking for the renter's ability to pay the rent and do so on time. So what does the score mean? In a nutshell, this is the general criteria that is used to analyze a credit score. A score above 680 is considered an excellent score. 620 to 679 is considered good. 580 to 619 is considered average. And below 580 is considered low or poor. The FICO score is a solid indication of a person's financial health. If you're wondering how many Americans have bad credit these days, you may be surprised. More than 1 in 4 Americans have a FICO score under 600, which is considered average. Even though the word average seems okay, this isn't really a good thing. Those with average credit scores will probably have difficulty getting a credit card, loans, or a mortgage. So this means that when you're looking at FICO scores, you want to focus on people that have a score in this range. Your ideal tenant would have an excellent credit score, but having a good credit score isn't bad either. You should hold off on anyone who has an average or low credit score, as they may have difficulty paying you. So, what makes up this number? This is revealed in step 5. In step 5, we want you to look at the trade lines, sometimes called account history. This is a person's entire credit history for the past 7 to 10 years. It can go on for pages and pages. This is where it can look a little scary for some. That's why a lot of people choose to avoid looking at this section. But we're going to make it simple for you. You only need to look at 2 things when you go through this section. You need to check out their payment history, meaning you need to make sure they're paying on time. If the person has no record of late payments in the summary, then you don't need to worry about this. If they have a couple, check to see what type, keeping in mind that late rent and utility bill payments are what you're really looking for and should be red flags. Other reasons for late rent may not be as important. Secondly, if this person is in debt, you need to see what type of debt it is. Check to see what institution they are in debt to. As you can see in the example here, you want to look for renters that are paying off their monthly dues on time. This person is paying their credit card on time as well as their loan payments. These are both good signs that this renter is responsible and is diligent about paying when they're supposed to. Step 6 involves looking at the number of credit inquiries a person has. So what are credit inquiries? Credit inquiries are the number of requests for a person's credit report. Oftentimes, when someone applies for a loan or credit card, there will be an inquiry into a person's credit. You want this number to be low, as in 3 or less is an okay number of inquiries over a short period of time, like a year. If there are any more than that, it could be a sign that the person is financially struggling because they're trying to apply for multiple loans or credit cards. In fact, according to a study, people that have 6 or more inquiries are 8 times more likely to declare bankruptcy than the average consumer. This only goes to show that you should be wary of anyone with multiple inquiries on their credit. The last step is step 7. Hopefully, you don't have to do this step at all. I will explain why in a second. Step 7 is public records. Your ideal tenant will not have the section included in their credit report, or it will be empty. What usually appears in this section that you need to look out for are eviction history, bankruptcy, and foreclosures. We don't want to see any of this in a person's credit report because it shows their lack of stability when it comes to finances. When we're looking for our quality renter, we don't want that. So when we put all of the steps together, we will end up with the perfect debtless tenant, right? In an ideal world, yes, but we know that that is not what happens in real life. The truth of the matter is that nobody is perfect, and everyone will have blemishes in their credit history. It's just a matter of knowing what items on a person's credit history are acceptable and what are not. There is a common misconception when people read credit reports that we want you to understand. Some people think that all forms of debt are bad and expose a person's inability to pay. Or people think that the person is financially responsible regardless of debt. But this isn't true at all. Some of forms of debt are okay and acceptable as long as the person is making their payments on time. 2 forms of acceptable debt are from student loans and medical bills. These are fairly normal and shouldn't necessarily be counted against the renter. Again, keep in mind that if the applicant is making all of their payments on time and managing their debt, that shouldn't affect their ability to get their monthly rental check to you. So, after analyzing the credit reports for all of your applicants and sifting through any bad eggs, you will be left with the most financially qualified applicant. If you have any other applicants for the unit, you're going to have to let them go. To avoid legal action against you, such as discrimination accusations, you need to send an adverse action letter, in accordance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, to the rest of the applicants, informing them why you rejected their application. You need to tell them what credit reporting agency you used and the reason why they were not approved. Some of the common credit-related reasons for rejection are finding a more qualified renter, the applicant has an insufficient income, history of eviction, foreclosure, or bankruptcy, or poor credit history. If you are unsure of how to construct this letter, seek legal help from someone like a lawyer to help write it. Avoid the temptation of skipping this step, because this will prevent you from getting into any legal troubles. Once you send out all of your rejection letters and keep a record of them, you will be ready to sign a lease with your most financially qualified tenant. So, what's the big takeaway here? Credit reports are an essential part of the lead qualification process for one major reason: financial stability. A positive credit report will tell you 2 major things. First, the person is financially responsible and can manage their money. Second, you don't have to worry about non-payments or late payments of rent because this person is financially fit. Because once your renter signs that lease, you have decided that you trust this person with paying for it. So, hopefully, you have learned about what to look for when reading a renter's credit report and what will help you find the best tenant. If you are interested in more free marketing resources, you should check out our marketing resources page or the RentJuice blog for tons of free advice. We actually have a free guide that breaks down credit reports available for download as well.
Thanks, Ian. Also, for some of you guys who came in a little bit later and maybe missed some of the webinar, we're recording the webinar right now. And once we get the recording. We're going to upload it to our blog so that you can access it from there and watch it anytime and use it as reference. So right now we're going to open up the floor to any questions. We have time for a few. So if you have any questions regarding credit reports or anything during the presentation, go ahead and enter them into the question box. There should be a dialog box in your GoToWebinar panel, and we're going to take any questions. All right, so someone is asking, what's wrong with only looking at a FICO score? I understand that a lot of people, they only tend to just look at the one score and make a judgment based on that. What's wrong with something like that, Ian?
So that's a great question. And I think one thing that we did try to kind of cover was that if you just look at the FICO score, you could miss out on other key information like late payments that would really affect the renter's ability to pay or give you some insight into how responsible they are. And the one thing to remember about the FICO score as well is that it's meant to cover a broad range of credit analysis. So it's not meant specifically for renting, and you want to make sure that you cover those other areas that are really important to you that may not be as important for people who are trying to give a loan or a new credit card or something like that.
I see. Um, we have another question from Amanda, and she is wondering, how much do credit reports cost?
So that really ranges given the size of your company, actually. So if you work for a large management company or brokerage, they can usually set up a deal directly with one of the credit vendors or with the credit agency actually directly. And that would be about $3 to $6 per report in that kind of relationship. If not, you'd have to find something, a secondary provider on the web, and that would probably be about $25 and maybe up to $30 per credit report, which is pretty expensive, but I've seen that before. So
Awesome. Great. Let me look through some questions here. Um, we have another question here that says, does a debt like eviction vanish off your credit score after 10 years?
So I think one of the things about credit report and specifically a FICO score is that it does change over time, and after that amount of time, it probably wouldn't be calculated in the FICO score itself. But that can still come up in the records since it's a piece of public data that should always be available. So that should be something that you can still see whether or not it's calculated in the actual FICO score. So that's actually another good reason to look over the whole report.
All right. Another question we have here is, what would you do if you only saw a few late payments?
So I think that definitely depends on the source. If it's on a debt like a student loan or something, or maybe it happened during a time where they were unemployed and now they have a job, then that's something that may not be as important as if you can see some late rent payments or utility bill payments. Those are the sorts of things you want to look at because it's a different type of payment. It's something that's recurring, and it's not necessarily the same as a long-term debt.
Another question we have here, and we're going to take one more after this, um, is what's the difference between the credit agencies? Because I know we have three institutions that are available to us. Do you know the difference between the three?
So the basic differences are that they have slightly different formulas for calculating the FICO score. I'm not sure exactly how they're different, but they're pretty much within, I think, about 20 points is kind of the standard deviation. So if you're using one of them, it's not going to be a huge difference between the other ones. If you're borderline, you might just want to consider that as a buffer, though, if you're just pulling one report, which is probably all that's necessary for renting, anyways. And the other difference is that they have sort of localized data. So each one has certain regions where they're stronger than the others. And so you might want to check that and see if, maybe the region that you operate in is specifically better to go with one of those as opposed to the others.
All right. Thank you for that. The last question that we have here is how much debt is considered reasonable for a renter?
Um, that's a good question. I think really with anyone, it's not really how much debt they have, but their ability to pay that debt. For instance, a lot of people these days have really large amounts of student loans, and if they went to grad school, they could have easily a couple $100, a couple $100,000 in student loans, outstanding. But those payments are also probably going to be pretty low since student loans actually will go on for up to 15 or 20 years, I think. So as long as the payment isn't absurdly high and it seems like something that they can fit in their budget along with rent and other expenses, I think it's fine. Really, it's just more about really more about that payment.
All right, we have one more question here. Sorry about that. I know I said the last one was going to be the last one, but we have one more. Um, how do credit cards tarnish your credit score?
So there are a couple ways, and I think first of all, if you just have one or two credit cards, that's totally normal. That's not going to hurt your credit, and in fact, it can help your credit if you're using them and paying them regularly. The problem is if you get too many cards and you have too much revolving debt um, open to you, meaning that you have a lot of money that you could spend on those cards before having to pay anything off. That's looked at as a liability, so that's something that's actually factored in the credit summary. There's also the fact that if you have a bunch of credit cards, you're probably going to have multiple credit inquiries, and those can definitely negatively affect your credit, especially if they're within a short period of time. And then also, with anything, if you don't pay it on time, or if you have a lot of outstanding debt, or especially if it goes to collections, that can hurt your credit score as well. But I think if you just have a couple credit cards and you're paying them regularly, even if there is outstanding debt there, it shouldn't really be a problem with your credit.
Thank you so much. Again, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. Again, we also have a free guide available on our marketing resources page, which is on this link here, rentjuice.com/rental marketing resources. Download that, and if you want to have a paper version of what we just went over, otherwise, we're going to post a recording on the blog. So thank you everyone for attending. Yeah, Ian?
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.